Good morning, everyone. And today, Wayne and I are going to be talking to you and hoping that you'll participate in post-employment services, probably one of the most vague processes in the VR process. And the reason for that is that there's really not much in the regulations that provides information about post-employment services. So today we're going to try and help uncloud the cloudiness, but part of that will be we'll be looking to you for questions and also comments in terms of some of you that have policies for it. So today, the learning outcomes, what we're looking at, hopefully that everyone, the participants, you'll all be able to, number one, learn the criteria for the provision of post-employment services, and we use the acronym PES. Number two, understand the rationale and distinction between post-employment services and opening a new case. And number three, learn the scope of services under post-employment services, the individualized employment plan for the provision of post-employment services. Boy, that one's kind of awkward. Sorry about that. And number four, attendees will learn the appropriate post-employment services successful outcomes. So if we, using the definition of post-employment services, we would be looking at it provides one or more vocational rehabilitation services to individuals whose original case was successfully closed, and then they request to have and request assistance in individuals with disabilities to maintain, regain, or advance in employment consistent with their individual strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, and capabilities and interests, thereby making the PES relevant to the original case. So what this is actually saying is that you have to have an original case, it has to be closed successfully, and then post-employment services can be provided. So you don't keep cases open for a long period of time because you think, well, maybe this person would want to come back and get services. No, we need to close our cases successfully after 90 days successful employment, and then we are able, if somebody needs something, we're able to provide those post-employment services. So what the notification to a consumer at the time of successful closure, counselors must, and that should be VR counselors, must inform the individual of the availability and purpose of post-employment services and their right and responsibility to contact their VR counselor before leaving their job, or if any problems arise jeopardizing their job. So, there was a time where we tracked our consumers. We tracked them 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year. We're not tracking anymore. But to a degree, I know that some of us are living in smaller communities than others, and you do know your consumers and you know your communities. And so it's really important that you are making information available, concise, and usable for the consumers of your program. So if we look at post-employment services based on the AVER's best practices, what are we looking at that's going to be provided to the individual? So we're looking at what I said earlier, that an individual must achieve 90 consecutive days of employment according to their individualized plan for employment. That individual needs to maintain or regain or advancing employment. So can anybody give me an example of of this particular thing to either maintain their employment or regain it? What would be a scenario? You can use the chat box, and Wayne's monitoring the chat box for us. So, you know, the individuals with their strengths and resources, an individual may, I'm trying to think of one example that I experienced. Somebody that is advancing, they got a promotion, and it's still within, we had a policy that we would provide services within 1 year of closing a case, especially due to the fact that it's only maybe one or two items that a person needs. So that person needed, let's say, needed a new pair of boots or something of that nature, or needed that promotion required a different clothing. So we might open a case for clothing allowance. And remember that maintenance is a little bit different, so be careful of that.
So we have a comment from Jackie, John.
Good.
And it says,
Great.
maybe they need assistive devices like a stool at the cash register. So if they have a standing
Excellent.
limitation or mobility issue, assistive device to help them continue to keep their job.
Right. Great. Thank you for that. I appreciate the information. That's really, that was really a good example. Thanks, Wayne. And was it Myrna?
Jackie.
Okay. Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. So then we're also looking at, has the individual's case successfully closed within the last 12 months? We're using the 12-month mark. Most programs are using that as best practices, that up to a year they can provide the services, but after a year you would really need to think about reopening. Not reopening, opening. Has a VR needs that are limited in scope and duration and will not require a complex or comprehensive level of services. You really need to hone in on that. If you're starting to get into multiple situations, like Jackie gave the example of a stool, or wonder if it's not just a stool, wonder if it's they might need new glasses, might need something else, whatever it is. If it's more than just that one type thing, then you're looking at needing to provide more services. And so then you're thinking about reopening that case. So when we look at post-employment services, we're also includes a variety of VR services or combination of services. Do we have anybody that would like to start putting comments in the chat box to talk about what are the variety of services that you may have provided for post-employment services?
We got a comment here.
Okay.
Charlene says if we help them with travel for hearing aids and we close them out, they had issues with the hearing aid, needed help with travel for appointment again. Would that be post-employment activity? So I'd like to have that question posed for the participants, and I'd like them to answer either, unmute your microphone or post in the chat box before we respond. I also posted a question there. What does your program use as the best practice for the timeline of services?
Good. Good. So maybe we'll just sit here and do the tick-tock, 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 waiting for the answers, because, our webinars are designed not to have Wayne and I do all the talking, or Winona, or Lee, or Jamie, whoever the one who is facilitating. So what we really want is to hear from you.
Just as a reminder, *6 on the phone mute and unmutes you. So
thank you, John. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And we've got two responses. Kim from Verna says usually 1 year. And then Jackie also stated that we try to stick to 1 year for the timeline.
Okay.
Anybody want to jump on to answer Charlene's question or to give some feedback on it? Kim jumped in the chat box. Kim's being shy today, I guess. This is the first time I've ever heard her not talk. Just kidding. I had to flip her.
You heard her not talk. That's a good one.
Oh, she's eating my lunch, she says.
Hey. No, I'm eating lunch, then I'll be back on.
So she says that for the hearing aids, if he needs those repaired to keep his job, it was hard for him to pay. Yes, we would help. So when it comes to these types of questions, this is a great example of a post-employment question. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in here because we do need to move forward with the presentation. But I want to use this as a great example, Charlene. Thank you for posting this.
Mm-hmm.
When we start talking about this type of situation, the first thing that pops into my head is I want to back up for a minute and make sure that we're providing more than just one service. Okay, so if you're purchasing hearing aids for this individual, there has to be a supporting secondary service that removes impediments to employment. So it can't just be a one and done type thing. There has to be a minimum of two significant services provided in a case to be considered successful employment. So when we look to moving that into supported or post-employment services, the issue for me becomes, in this question is what has that individual been doing with the money that they've been earning at their job? Okay, so that would be one of the first questions I had. Within that time frame, how long are we out of closure? Okay, so if we just close this case after 90 days, that individual hasn't had that long of a period of time to establish a nest egg, to establish a transportation fund or anything like that. In that situation, and if it's required as part of maintaining employment, then you could really look at possibly paying for that post-employment service. If this individual is in the 11th month of closure, right, and so he's had 9 months to save up money, then there'd be more of a hard sell for me to say, yeah, we'll provide this for you. There'd be more of a discussion. Now, the other part of this is the maintenance question, and Suzanne brought that up already. Does everybody who has hearing aids have to pay for their transportation to get to their hearing aid appointments after post-employment or after case closure? So if that answer is yes, then we got to kind of take a look at that maintenance. This might be a maintenance cost, a general maintenance cost. And that's where transportation for me always falls in, is that maintenance category. And maintenance isn't allowed under post-employment services unless it's connected to a training that's going to help them obtain advancement or maintain their current level of employment. So in this situation, to answer your question fully and to be able to answer it to the best of our ability based off the definitions, we would need more information in this situation. So where it sits now, I would say that this is probably a maintenance cost that everybody with hearing aids has to incur. Now, I understand also, being from Alaska, some of those transportation costs get really prohibitive. If you're having to book a bush plane to get in to get your hearing aids checked, that could be a different situation. So again, we need more information, but that's kind of the gist of what I was trying to get at. We got some more responses here, Rachel. We often use the language of if their disability worsens or they develop a new disability. Basically, ideally, we provided the coordinated all they need to maintain the job they were closed in. After they've been employed a period of time, hopefully they or their employer would be providing any accommodation for health-related needs. So basically what she's saying is that they try and make sure that all this is done up front at closure. And that's, good case management practices. Is if you're moving to closure, you're helping that individual maintain employment. And again, you got to remember that the language talks about closure being a minimum of 90 days and the individual stable in their employment. So this is a really good example of making that step and supporting that individual in closure. Anita also got on here. She has a question. So after 1 year, if the consumer returns to the PE services and they are still employed with the same employment outcome that they had when they closed successfully, do we need to require them to do a new application? So this one goes back to your guys' policies in your programs. What are your policies state? I can tell you what the CFR states, and the CFR does not have a specific timeline. There is no hard and fast rule under post-employment services. And so that's when we say the best practices that we follow are 12 months. So in that situation, it would be, I'd ask you to refer back to your policies, see what your policies state. And then if your policies allow that to happen, then you should have that process in place, allowing those decisions to be made in providing post-employment services.
And I would like to mention two things. I'm going to go to Anita's question. If it's after 1 year, and that's your policy, your PES policy, then if you are opening a new case, then you would follow, as Wayne said, the directions of how you start a new case. So when you're opening a new case and they fill out a new application, you're looking at probably filling out a new application. But again, as Wayne said, you have to follow your program policy. And I think I wanted to talk something a little bit about the transportation and maintenance, and Wayne's example of looking at someone that has been the sample that we were given in terms of oh my God, my brain has gone dead here. The transportation for the person with the hearing, needing hearing aids and what I think is that you have to I think Wayne's idea is sound, and I think that we all try to do that in terms of helping somebody budget their money so that by the time the 11th month comes of consecutive services, as consecutive employment, that they have some money. But we have to remember that an individual with sometimes significant disabilities, such as a hearing loss that may need some different services, there may be some circumstances that preclude the fact that they were able to budget enough money. So it's not just sitting down and making a cookie cutter example of something. We just want to make sure that we're giving you the entire picture. At the end, you're the one that has to make the decision and whether this person is going to be receiving the service. But to the best that we know is that is what was shared today. So I turn it over to you, Wayne.
Okay, thank you. I'm responding real quick in the chat box, and then I'll start talking on the slide. All right, so I was just responding back to Anita. She said, thank you. I didn't find anything in the CFR when I checked.
Right.
I said, okay, I'll send out that information after the presentation. Amanda also stated that we have case open for tracking up to 3 years. After that, we have them reapply with updated medical status. So this is another great example of interpretation of the CFR, right? So not having a specific timeline. Amanda's program has decided to track them for 3 years and to have that available for a period of 3 years. Others do 12 months, some do 6 months. It's variable. So it's how you interpret it and how you have it in your policies to provide those services.
One thing to consider having it out there for 3 years is the fact that that's a wonderfully long extended period of time. But over that 3 years, the possibility of actually opening a new case Wayne can talk more to this in terms of post-employment services. You don't really get any check marks in your annual performance report. So you may want to think about how does having post-employment services affect you positively or negatively in terms of the timeline that we're offering to the consumer and former consumer. Wayne?
Right. And so back in the day, when we still used codes and all that fun stuff, we had what was called hidden 26s. And those hidden 26s were actually our post-employment cases that were successfully maintained employment after providing those services. And you could count those as part of your final report out in your annual report, or at the state level, it was there. I can't remember what they call it at the state. It's like the VR 1191 or something like that. I can't remember. Anyways, or 911 or 911 form or whatever it is. So that's where we had that hidden 26. And since then, I think August came out and made a statement that AVERS programs can no longer count those as in their final report or their annual reports. So that's kind of a downer. So Rachel made a comment here. For Anita's question, sometimes we let them know they are welcome to apply, but depending on the situation, if they were closed successfully, they may not fall under the needed services category or criteria. Just because they were eligible for before doesn't mean they are eligible again if they don't have a new disability or additional barriers. They are rehabilitated. Some may be eligible again, but not because they want to change jobs or lost their job for reasons not related to disability. Okay, and then that's a great point. Because we are an eligibility criteria-based program, you do have to have a new disability or a substantial change in your current disability to become eligible if you reapply. In some situations, people are fully rehabilitated at the end of it and they don't qualify for VR services. And a lot of people see that as a very negative situation, but when we look at it from our perspective, in the helping people get employed perspective, that's a great thing. That's our goal. We want you to be rehabilitated. We want you not to have to come back to us and get services again. So Amanda, did you want me to talk about August, I assume? Okay, so at one point, if you provided post-employment services and they maintained employment under post-employment services, that was considered a successful outcome or a hidden 26. I think it's status 33 or 32. I can't remember right now off the top of my head. Under that status, it was a success. You would then write a case note saying that post-employment services allowed the individual to maintain employment. I am closing this case as successfully rehabilitated and maintain employment. Done. And then that was then could be counted as a hidden 26. It was another category of success that you could document in your report. So if, let's say, if your annual numbers of successful closures was 22 and you had 20 successful closures, you were short three cases to meet in your numbers, you could go back and look at your post-employment stuff and count those as hidden 26s, and then your numbers would be met. You'd have 23 or whatever the number is that you provided post-employment services to and successfully maintain their employment. So then that's how you met your numbers. Well, currently I don't think that's allowed anymore, and I will reach out to the team at AVERTAC and we'll reach out to August and confirm. But I remember on a discussion with August that post-employment services successfully maintained employment cases are no longer countable in our reporting. But I will get that information out to everybody. And to your comment, unemployment caused by COVID-19, I don't know where RSA stands on that right now. I know there's been a lot of leeway provided for service provision, but I don't know if eligibility criteria is going to be altered for COVID. So that would be something you want to throw at your project officer. All right, so back to great conversations in the chat box. Thank you. Now we're going to move to step onto the PowerPoint here, and it's talking about post-employment services, including a variety of services or a combination of services. So as we go through post-employment services, you saw me break down a little bit on Anita's, or on the question that was brought forward about the hearing aids. And I really like that, and I want to use that as an example in this slide. So we start talking about all VR services become eligible for post-employment services. However, it has to show a direct need to supporting that individual in maintaining or advancing in their employment. Now, it gets really confusing here when there's some language about obtaining employment. Okay, so what I want to take a minute and talk about that, because some of the services would be on the job supports or job search assistance. Those services can be provided. So what we look at in obtaining employment under post-employment services is the individual has less than 72 hours between employment opportunities. So let's say Frank is working at X factory. Z factory across the street contacts Frank and says, hey man, we'll give you $2 more an hour for doing the same job. We like how you work. Frank decides, okay, I'm going to go to Z. He contacts his VR counselor and says, look, I don't know what the process is over here. I'm a little concerned about stepping into a new facility. Can you help me make this transition? In that situation, if all the other criteria is met that we've already covered, that would be an allowable post-employment service for obtaining employment, okay? But anything over roughly 72 days, and again, this language, it's not in the CFR, it's about best practices, okay? So when we look at that for obtaining employment, if it's anything over 3 days, then we'd want to say, okay, look, we need to do a new application, we need to get a new case, if you choose to go that route. Otherwise, you know, we can keep you in your current position. So it's not the standard obtaining employment. It's a little bit of a tweaked obtaining employment situation. And again, transportation and maintenance and personal assistance services, that has to be connected. If you're doing transportation or maintenance, it has to be connected to a different service. So again, training, they're going out of town to get training to help them maintain that employment, that type of thing. Counseling and guidance, again, it's there. It's one of the services that we provide across the board. It's not, it shouldn't even have to be talked about. It just is what we do. And then we have to make sure that we complete an amended IPE. So we get a lot of questions about post-employment services. Do we need to do a new case? Do we have to do a new application? Do we have to do a new IPE? And the answers are no. When you open a post-employment case, you create a case note saying this individual has applied for, or requested, not applied, requested post-employment services to maintain or advance their career. You explain what it is. That's how you open the case. That's all there is to it. There's no application. It's a case note in the file saying that this individual requested, and we're going to move forward in supporting that individual. The IPE is an amendment. Okay, it's an amendment to an IPE. In a lot of cases, programs just call it a post-employment services IPE, a PES IPE. And under that, you list the time-limited, very specific services that are going to be provided to that individual. You have to have a description of what's being provided and how long it's being provided and what it's being provided for. You also have to address comparable benefits. Again, all this stuff from developing an IPE and provision of services earlier in the VR process still remains true. You can't shortcut it. You can't not provide those services. So comparable benefits are still part of it. Informed choice is still part of it. The consumer has to have a voice in making these decisions. And again, in order to provide these post-employment services, to develop these post-employment IPEs, amendments, we don't need to do a new termination of eligibility. If you get into this situation and you realize that there's going to be several services to provide or needed to be required to be provided to help that individual maintain their employment, then you're going to have to step back and reopen the case and go through the eligibility process. Again, these are time limited, very specific services, and we're talking 1 or 2 services to get into post-employment services.
And according to your policy, you know, an individual can come in for post-employment services with one item and maybe a month later come in for another item. You have to make sure that the policy that you develop amplifies or exaggerates or delineates, finding the word, that really identifies those services and how those services are going to be provided. Again, this is one of the most misunderstood services in VR, and I think that the explanations that are being, you know, Wayne is doing a great job here explaining these different scenarios. Just want to just chime in there to make sure that you know that your policy is going to help you direct the momentum of your PES. Go ahead, Wayne.
I need to post in here that data ops database provides a post-employment plan form. Correct. The database programs that are out there now, the systems that are out there that are available for AVERS programs all have that post-employment plan in place already to be used, and it doesn't require reopening the case. So that's a positive. I know they've worked hard to meet those needs. So, all right, next slide, Suzanne.
This was the next slide, I think. Are we done with this one?
Yep.
Okay. I think
And
the CFR was on the bottom of that other one. Okay.
yeah.
It's all yours.
So yeah, when this PowerPoint comes out, the CFR information will be in there also, but I'll also send it out in an email as well. So post-employment eligibility. We touched on this briefly before, just kind of giving you the overview. Now we're going to break it down into more in depth. So what is needed? When we hear post-employment, it's like, well, let's give them the kitchen sink. Let's open the door. Let's them all come back in. A lot of times when you're closing a case, post-employment services are used as a safety net or a security blanket. I say that not sarcastically. I say it because I did it all the time. When I have a client that was freaking out at closure because they were losing their supports in their minds, they were losing that extra network of support, I would use this as a security for them to hold on to. And that is that we're always here for, you know, to support you for a limited time, right? So if we got 12 months to get back in here. Secondly, I would follow up with, you can reapply anytime. So that would kind of help them feel better. But when you get that request to come back in, you have to ask the question, why are they coming back? Well, they need to maintain, regain, or advance in employment. That's the first thing. And then we have to explore why the services are being asked, and if they are consistent with their grade 8. Okay. And the grade 8, we've all heard before. I don't want to read them all. That's why I always say the grade 8, because I'm lazy. And when that happens, all that means is that we aren't providing them services that they don't require and don't want. Okay, so let's say the individual comes in and we can provide them a post-employment service that we think would help them, and they don't want it. We still have to respect that informed choice. And we look at, did they achieve a 90-day employment outcome in accordance with their IPE? Okay, so if the case isn't closed they're still in IPE, they're not eligible for post-employment services. If the case was closed unsuccessful under an IPE, they did not obtain employment, they did not meet the minimum 90 days, and we had to close the case, then they're not eligible for post-employment services. This is only for successfully closed cases connected to their IPE goal. And that is a huge part of it, okay? So the employment takes, that the case is closed in has to be connected to the current need for maintaining employment. Now, when I say that, what that means is if they're closed as a, I don't know, a truck driver, and they come back in requesting post-employment services, and now they're, I don't know, a computer tech. All right, so those two things, you can't provide those supported services because the work goal that they were closed in was a truck driver, a CDL truck driver. And now they're requesting help to maintain their employment as a computer tech. So they need some, tools or whatever. It has to still be connected to their employment goal that you closed them in. Another example I have is I've closed an individual. They got hired as a dishwasher and a busser at a restaurant. The individual, within a short period of time, was able to move into a host position. She had a great personality, but she was scared. She didn't know how to interact with people. She didn't know what the responsibilities were. And where that is an advancement in employment, she still was eligible because she was closed in a dishwasher's position, but she was getting promoted to a host position. So where it's still the same employer, the same position, and advancing, then you can keep those post-employment services eligible and provided to that individual. Okay, next, and again, the 12 months best practices, again, it goes back to your policies and what your program determines to be appropriate. Charlene put in the chat box, how would we or could we insert language in for post-employment for an individual does not want services for something we know they suffer from? Also, we help them with the disability they listed, then we close them. Later, they want services for something that they declined. So in that situation, it kind of goes back to the old adage of he who has the gold gets to make the rules. And if the individual is not willing to identify that disability, then we cannot provide services to that disability. So when we go all the way back to the other end of the spectrum, and we're talking about now determining eligibility, you always pick the significant primary disability, a secondary disability, and then you identify all of the other disabilities in your case note so that you can see that all these disabilities are present. If you have that information there, then in the active IPE, you can provide services to those other disabilities because you've already acknowledged them and identified them as creating barriers or impediments to employment. In this situation where the individual is refusing services and refusing to identify the disability, that leaves us with no grounds to stand to provide any services. It would be an inappropriate service provision if we went ahead and provided services without having that support in the file. So it goes all the way back to the eligibility, and we don't really need to have any language in there because it goes back to the basis of eligibility of the VR in the beginning of the VR process. Amanda threw in here, if a consumer comes back after a successful closure for post-employment, we just amend the IPE if it's within the 3 years. Correct. That's how you do it. You'd amend the IPE, make a case note showing that you're opening the case, and go from there. And it's interesting that we're all getting into this discussion now because this slide is about the procedure. What happens when you determine that post-employment services are appropriate for this individual? First thing you got to ask is, was there an IPE post-employment amendment written in order to provide the relevant VR services? You need to have the date of the IPE amendment, and you also have the description of the terms and conditions for the provision of all those post-employment services. You have to have the duration of the post-employment services. So again, start and end date. Usually my guideline was 30 days, maximum 60 days. If I was in there 2 months, I was reopening a case. If it was over 2 months, I was going to reopen a case. Because then we're getting into too much expenditure for the program and too many support services taking place. Does it meet the same requirements as the services provided at all other stages of the VR process? So again, informed choice, the grade 8, all those things come into play, even under post-employment services. We have to acknowledge the individual's needs and their own desires, and their voice has to be heard under post-employment services. Are we utilizing comparable services and benefits? Again, it's you know, we got to stretch our dollars as best we can, and we're required to always look to comparable benefits and partnerships services prior to the provision of any service, including post-employment services. Does the
Sorry. Sorry about that.
And if you are providing comparable benefits and services, you have to have a statement of how those services are going to be provided through the post-employment amended IPE time restrictions, or I don't know what I'm trying to time zones, time frames. You pick it. There we go. Okay, so those last 3 slides are incredibly important. And as you go through it and listen to it the first time, it can be very confusing. And sometimes with post-employment, what I've found is that when it's being trained on or presented on, it gets really confusing. And then you think you have it, and then it gets confusing again. So please, if you guys have any questions, now's the time to ask those questions. When we got 54 people on here, I'm sure we can come up with a consensus answer somewhere. If you have those questions, please throw them out there. Let's talk about it.
I just wanted to show this particular document because this document is, I think and hope, on our website. If not, it is in a folder to be shared with everyone. And basically, it covers the PowerPoint, and it provides you a questionnaire of everything that Wayne just covered right now. So you can have a document that's a reminder. You can have this document as something to look at in terms of if you don't have a PES policy, you can develop one, or if you have one, you might want to compare to see if this is in agreement with other things that with what you have. I wanted to ask, is there, first of all, are there any questions? I think Wayne really brought a lot of flavor to post-employment services, which is often just kind of written over or glossed over, and partially because the regulations are so vague. And so this, again, Wayne is saying this is your opportunity. I agree with him. This is your opportunity to ask those questions that might seem embarrassing, but they're not, because we've all done it, been there, done that. And maybe tell us some of the things that you've experienced, something that you experienced that was positive, something that was negative, something that, so I'm going to be quiet and ask. We need to hear from you. Are the mics open, John? Do we have open mics so people can chat?
We do. Everyone has the ability to unmute themselves. Just a reminder, if you're on the phone, *6 will mute and unmute.
And that is the guy that we need at AVATAC all the time. Thank you, John. He is so helpful, and he helps us all the time with all this technical stuff. And he has office hours. Don't you still have office hours?
Yeah, coming up next. And videos are active too, so if you want to turn on your video so we can see your face,
yes.
Please do that.
So,
Okay.
Are we going to see some faces? Well, there's Karen. Oh, there we go. Hi, Karen.
I've got my fire burning behind me today. It was cold last night. Yeah. So,
John?
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No, I was just gonna say, John could use that right now.
I
But
bet.
a real
I bet.
one.
Uh,
Go ahead, Karen.
So I've got a consumer that has been working at a factory that's been inundated with COVID-19. So I had closed him successfully, maybe 2 months ago. And he called me up and said he'd started a new job because of the COVID situation, that he didn't feel safe there anymore. And so he's working through People Ready, which is a temporary employment agency that a lot of guys that have felonies are able to find employment through pretty quickly. And he had said, is there any chance of getting some kind of rental assistance? And I said, well, you really need to talk to, these other organizations. I said, that's not really something that, we can do at this point. But now listening to the conversation, I'm wondering if that was accurate.
I didn't get the last part. I'm sorry. Could you...
Listening to the conversation about the maintenance, if we can tie it to a disability, I'm wondering if denying him that service was accurate, or if there would be something else I would be able to offer him that I haven't thought about yet.
Well, and I might not have understood
He was
all of it.
he was asking for rental assistance.
Rental assistance.
Yes, which wasn't he had to do relocation to employment. And so that was in his IPE, that had already been provided. And so I just, at the time I spoke with him, last month, I said, he hadn't talked to me about what he was doing. He hadn't talked to me about the COVID situation at work and that he was going to get this other job. He had not communicated any of that to me.
So he completed, in the first place he worked, he completed the 90 days success.
Oh, he had completed more than the 90 days. I had kept the case open to continue to provide stability, and we got to a point where he felt, we could close, and we did. But then not long after that, the situation occurred, and now he is in another position. And so I did refer him to DVR for some other services,
right?
Which he had initially turned down when we first started working together, but I really think he could utilize them.
Right.
And so what his basic request was maintenance for rent.
Right.
And so I said, well, we'd already provided that service, and that really wasn't something we could do in post-employment, and he has a new job.
Yeah, and you're looking at, I mean, I want to answer, give my opinion, but I would like to hear from the audience. I'd like to hear, I know Wayne and I would like to hear, what do some of you think? Would you think about, I'm not even gonna say some of the suggestions because then you'll just jump in and do it. So, can we hear something, Amanda? Is this in relation to what, Amanda has something, but I don't think it's in relation to Karen. What do you think, Wayne? Should we wait patiently to hear from people, or do you want to jump in and give your opinion? I know what mine is.
Well, Rachel responded, Karen, I would have done the same based on what you shared, trying to help him get assistance elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have...
Would anybody consider reopening them?
Charlene has a question for Karen. Was he out of work for any amount of time? Is his pay the same or less?
I think the pay is the same. He was probably out of work for a couple of weeks.
Did he collect unemployment?
Probably not.
Somebody's trying to talk. Did I hear somebody? Well, does anybody think there would be a possibility to reopen this case? Because it's a new job? It's past the 90 days? I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
Well, I was thinking about that too, but he's not really asking for that. He's asking for like just one specific thing.
Right.
And the company that he had been working with now has a like a human resources service that's electronic, that is very difficult to get any information from in terms of what happened at the end of this time period, to follow up on the actuality of what has happened, you know, in case he's not being as forthcoming as he would need to be.
Right. Right. Well, you know, I know that it's hard to go back and think about, you know, maybe based on what we were talking today, that you might feel that you know, you would want to offer them. But it goes back to maintenance does require another service, and you're right in terms of the maintenance that he was requesting was not attached to any other service. So being able to provide him just transportation to the new place is not something that you can do. And the only thing that came to my mind was perhaps reopening it, but if there's not anything else attached to it, then how do you do that? You did forward him on to DVR in your state. So I don't have any other. Wayne, do you have anything that you could see, any way that we can get around some of these tight corners that
Well, and
might be?
yeah, it's always a tough spot. I mean, because we all
Yeah,
want
it
to
is.
help people. I mean, that's
Yeah,
just
that's
it.
what
We
we're here
wanna,
for. Yeah.
yeah.
It is a different job, and it is a temporary job. Well, whether it would lead to long-term employment, I'm not sure. Um, but this has given me some ideas of things to talk to him about differently, to
Mhm.
kind of do a different kind of an evaluation or an assessment with him,
Yeah.
uh, to make that, you know, determination about, is this a reopen? Is this a maintenance? Which is this right now?
Well,
Um,
and we got to also remember that we don't support temporary employment.
right,
It has to
And
be it has to be permanent. It can be
right.
permanent part-time, permanent seasonal, permanent, you know, it has to have the word permanent in there. So if it's temporary, you can't support that work goal anyways.
Yeah.
and think about talking to the individual about unemployment in terms of if he's been laid off because of COVID, then, you know, or, well, he chose to leave, is that correct? So there isn't any unemployment.
Well, that's what I was trying to get clarification on from him, and I haven't successfully done that yet. He
Okay.
indicated that he was afraid, but that um, they also
I'm
had
having
him.
trouble hearing you, Karen.
They also had him go on a 2-week furlough prior to this because he had a temperature. So it's been something that's kind of been ongoing for the last several months. Um, and it's been problematic, but he did manage to maintain his employment, you know, for, I would say, I think since last November, so almost a year.
Well, Casey Bird came up with really a good recommendation here. There may be a disability-related issue with relocating. Go to the eligibility determination and see if employment is permanent, but we've already talked about employment being permanent and temporary. I think that you know, further exploration, you said that by this dialogue you have a little bit more that you would like to discuss with this particular individual. And in that regard would be able to maybe flush something a little bit more out. Winona, Winona, I don't know, but she's not, anyway.
Thank you. Very
Casey's
helpful. Very helpful.
good. The
Yeah.
recommendation is maybe a reopen,
Okay.
and that's where I came from.
All right.
Thank you, Karen. Yes,
Thank
Wayne.
you.
I want to just touch real quick on the COVID stuff with VR services and reopening cases and I know a lot of programs, and I've talked to a lot of different directors, and the general consensus is that we're backing off on a lot of the hard-nosed case management stuff, because we understand that there's a lot of unknown happening, and so all the programs are shifting to really try and support that client, you know, erring on the side of the client instead of erring on the side of the program. And in a lot of cases, I always think it goes back to, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission sometimes when it comes to supporting people. And I still feel that way, you know. In this situation, though, it goes back to, for me, one, temporary position, I can't support it. Two, our number one service that we provide across the board is referral. That's one thing that we do. So it's counseling and guidance, and then referral to other programs, right? That's kind of usually how it goes. So you did that. You provided a service to the individual. You referred him to the next best thing that could help him get into a better position. And then past that, I'd be looking at, you know, maybe doing an eligibility, a new application, see if he meets the eligibility criteria. And if it's, if it, you know, like you explained how it was COVID related and all that stuff, maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I don't know how that's going to play out. So just rambling thoughts before I turn it back over to Suzanne.
Well, we know how to play ball. Wayne and I have been doing this for a while, and he's such a great partner. It's really makes doing webinars much more comfortable. This was not my comfort zone starting out, and Lee can testify to that. In 2016, boy, did we have fun laughing at ourselves. Anyway, I think about the post-employment services and what each and every one of you are doing on a daily basis. You're trying to provide exemplary services that you've been providing over the years. Some of you have had programs for quite a long time. Some of you are new directors in new VR counselors or supporting staff in programs that have been established for a while or brand new programs. But the point is that we're in unmarked territory here with COVID-19. And we're all, most of us in social services we're about people, and not being able to connect physically, having our folks come into the office and being able to embrace them in the way that we have done over the years is very difficult. This unmarked territory is, as Wayne said, is making us look to err on the side of our consumers. And that's not a bad thing. It really isn't. Try to, if you're doing that, try to find the middle way, where when you're doing that, you want to be able to stay within the guidelines as much as you can, as well as be able to provide those services so that you can bring them together and make it work for you. So I'd like to hear, we still have a little bit of time, and then I have a little announcement or request that I would like to make for an upcoming webinar. But I'd like to know, is there any other conversations that we really need to have about post-employment services? I think that we've really gone over the difference between providing maintenance that must be connected with the service, okay? And we talked about all of those unknowns. There's a real long chat. Somebody just, Winona just provided, what did you provide, Winona?
It's the next webinar in this series.
Okay, great.
So it just, we didn't have it in here. It just got approved. So we wanted to make sure that people heard about it. September 15th, we'll be talking about providing services during a pandemic and how to use social media as a resource. And we'll have people presenting with Winona. Yeah, just check it out in the or the chat box. It gives you a brief description.
You'll see an invite come out later today, and then also in our AverTech weekly update tomorrow.
Thank you, Winona. Thank you, John. That's great. And this one, you want to talk about the one that's on the slide, Wayne? This is yours. TVR services to groups. The who, what, why, when, and where of providing services. This is another one of those really hard to wrap your hands around and your brain around providing TDR services to groups. And Rebecca Holland and Lenore Creole will be providing this presentation, and it will be on September 24th from 10 to 11:30, same time. But before we go, to ask you to beg for the survey. I am working on two different webinars. One, I don't have the title in front of me right now because I changed the title. What I'm looking for is if any of you are on this webinar can think about those individuals, either your consumers that have had COVID-19, have had the virus, and would like to talk. I'm looking for about 4 programs that would be willing to identify at least 2 individuals. And what we want to do is have a conversation. I would provide like a questionnaire, and I would ask the individuals to, we would provide the questions so that, and what we're doing is really turning it over to the consumers of the program, asking them to tell us about their journey. And we might also be looking at, rather than just maybe they didn't contact COVID, but how COVID impacted us, like Karen was sharing with the individual that she just talked about. There might be other individuals that had a job and lost a job. So we really want to hear about that. And then we're going to have, and then we would have a talking circle after that. And we would be looking to find maybe some medical professionals that would be willing to talk about some of the things medically that that is in the forefront mostly for American Indian and Alaska Natives with disabilities. The one disability is like diabetes. The next webinar would be, I'm trying to get a hold of Arizona Behavioral Health because I live in Arizona. And I've also contacted a former director of Arizona DVR. And what we're looking in, I have Catherine Lewandowski and Rebecca Holland, and I've talked with other people, and what we're trying to do there is that mental picture that everybody's been asking about. So if we could get some people from behavioral health to talk about it and then have a talking circle. And I would like to invite any of the consumers that participated to be part of those talking circles and the other webinars so that they could hear some stories. I'm sorry for the, you know, it's really, rather than just doing this on an email to the large community, I thought this might be a good time to maybe ask. You know, part of it is that you've already asked for these types of webinars, and now as we're putting it together, how can you participate? So I will, please email me and let me know if you're willing, if you have some people that would be willing. That would be really great. So thank you. Wayne?
Yeah, so as we go into closing here, I want to ask you guys for some feedback, not only on the survey, but any specific information that you are struggling with on post-employment services that we could make into a tool or into a checklist or just even a point on our website for people to come back and and click on later, please email it to us. avertac@nau.edu is our email. John, you want to throw that in there real quick?
Sure thing.
Thank you. And then just give it to us, ideas, and again, any other ideas also. I mean, not just related to post-employment services. If there's other VR process steps that you have questions about that you think a tool could help you with, email it to us, please, and we'll get on that and get that developed for you.
Oh, we do have a tool, and I did share it a little bit, but we can always work on it and improve it. And that is going to be in our share. That's in our share folder for this particular webinar.
Right.
But what we would like is the feedback on that in terms of, is this tool something that that you could use, or is it something that you would like us to, how could we improve it? I guess that's the question I would like to know. So this is the tool that we currently have. It does have a checkbox. And I think this is on our website, and John would have to help with that. But this tool was developed in March. I think it was developed earlier than that. This might be a revision. But this is basically, it's a questionnaire. Most of the answers should be, if after you look at it. But again, this is just, like what we've come to put together. And what Wayne is asking is, please look at it. If you already have something like this, send us yours. If you look at this one and see things that you'd like added, please let us know so we can update it. Thank you, Wayne.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say is, with all the fires and other stuff going on in the world today, please be safe and just keep everybody in their prayers. I hope you all are safe and able to take a minute and just recognize where you're at.
Yes, thank you. I like the way Lenora opens her webinars or her talking. She usually asks for a prayer, and we usually close with a prayer. So I think what you were asking is close to a prayer that we have today. So are there any questions, comments? From Avertac, we say thank you. Be safe. Take care of yourselves and your families. Blessings.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Karen.
Have a good week.
Bye, Amanda.
Bye, Amanda.
See you, Philbert.
Bye, Philip.
Philip.
Thank you all. You're great people. Take care out there.
Thank you.